Right now I'm standing at what appears to be a normal piece of land in the mid of Germany, but that's not the case. Right here, 250 years ago, a battle was fought. A battle over not less than the control of the world. In the 750s, Europe was at the edge of a huge war. France and Britain were in conflict over their territories in America and India. In Central Europe, Prussia had gained the status of a regional power and was now the target of Russia and Austria. As a war between France and Britain became inevitable, both nations began to search for allies on the European continent. As Britain was in a personal union with the Kingdom of Hanover, they needed a continental power to defend it. They found their ally with Frederick the Great, the King of Prussia. France reacted and formed an alliance with Austria, their old rival. Russia, which needed a reason to fight against Prussia, did also join their alliance. In September 1756, the war began. After 3 years of fighting, no winner was in sight. Cities were conquered and reconquered, but no one was able to gain a strategic advantage. However, the French king planned to change this in 1759. A giant French army would conquer the region of Hanover and kick them out of the war. At the same time, Russia and Austria would take on Prussia. The plan was set and more than 100,000 French soldiers separated into two armies marched on Hanover. The bigger army of 70,000 chose to march over Minden. Minden was an important strategic point for crossing into West Germany. For this reason it had been occupied 2 times by French forces, and in July 1759 they occupied it a 3rd time. The Allies realized that they had to stop the French army. To do so, they sent more than 40,000 men under the General Ferdinand von Braunschweig. The city of Minden was a bastion. It was not only protected by walls, but also by Mother Nature. Right behind me you can see the remains of the old city wall, and right beneath it there's the Weser. The river protects the north and east side of the city. Von Braunschweig knew that he could not just attack a city like this. He had to lure his enemy out of it. More specific, he had to engage them on the northern side of the city. Here, the river and the marshes formed a natural border of the battlefield, allowing his 40,000 troops to engage the 70,000 French soldiers. On the 31st of July 1759, Braunschweig ordered his men to attack the French outposts in Lübbecke, a city not far from Minden. The French troops under the Marquis de Contades catched the bait and began to march out of the city at 10 p.m. Harsh weather conditions allowed them to cross the Weser without being spotted by the Allies. Von Braunschweig only heard from the French troop movement at 4 a.m. in the morning. He immediately ordered his men to take the important village of Hameln. However, Hameln had already been occupied by French battalions. Soon, the first shots would be fired. Right now I'm standing where the first shots of the Battle of Minden were fired. At around 5 a.m. in the morning, on the 1st of August 1759, French musketeers were engaged by German marksmen at Hameln. The precise fire of the marksmen forced the musketeers to retreat into the city center. Hameln was a very important strategic point. From here you could control the gates of Minden. To the luck of the Allies, the Marquis de Contades waited till his whole army had crossed the Weser. Von Braunschweig had only kept a small fraction of his troops at Minden, while the rest of his men were rushing to the battlefield from the camp in Hille. The French hesitation allowed the Allies to go into position. More important, it allowed the Allied heavy artillery to go into position, which would play an important role later. The second stage of the battle was fought right over here, on the Mindener Heide. The second column under General Spoerken, consisting of 6 British and 2 Hanoverian battalions, came out of a forest over there. To their surprise, they realized that they were isolated, as the other columns were still marching to the battlefield. Spoerken had received the order to advance upon the beat of drums, meaning that he should wait for a signal. However, he understood that he should advance under the beating of drums. As soon as the Allied army left the forest, they came under heavy artillery fire, mostly from French 80-pounders stationed at Mailbergen, now Maulbeerkamp. Not only that, The third column was also facing 7,500 French cavalrymen. Usually, cavalry would be placed on the flanks of the army, but the marshes did not allow the generals to do so. The French dragoons launched an attack at the vulnerable battalions, but thanks to a high morale, they were able to fight them off. A second attack failed too. The British and German soldiers waited till the French units were only 50 meters away. Then they fired a precise salve, bringing most of them down. At around 7 a.m. in the morning, the commander of the French cavalry was furious. He sent more than 2,000 of his most elite dragoons to end Spurgeon's resistance. The dragoons broke through the English lines and inflicted heavy casualties upon them. However, Spurgeon and his men were joined by several allied battalions. After being under fire from all sides, the French cavalry was forced to retreat. Now something strange happened. The Hanoverian battalions grabbed their bayonets and charged after the dragoons, something unseen before. Usually you would be expecting that Spurgeon's men would be happy about their survival, but it seemed like they still had to settle a score with the French. During their attack they captured around 5 enemy standards. On the Mindener Heide the Allies had gained another important strategic victory. Now we are at the Maulbeer camp, the centrum of the two armies and position of the French artillery. From here, French 80-pounders had fired upon the men of Spurgeon, inflicting heavy casualties to them, but now they were the target of the Allied attacks. The French commander Marquis de Contades arrived at the French position at around 7 a.m. and ordered multiple infantry and cavalry brigades to attack the Allied troops on the Mindener Heide. However, the French units were intercepted by 2 German divisions. After they had defeated the French regiments, they aimed at the French artillery on the Maulbeer camp. At one point, even the Hanoverian Guard dragoons tried to take the French position, but they were also forced to retreat after suffering heavy casualties. After several attacks, the Allied troops ran out of bullets. 2 Hessen battalions tried one last assault, only equipped with their bayonets. They managed to overrun the French artillery, capturing 5 guns. The remaining French troops tried to retreat to the French line in the south, but they were stopped by a large Prussian cavalry charge. Only a brave counterattack of the French cavalry prevented a total annihilation of the French battalions. Following the French defeat in the centrum, the left wing of the French army was forced to retreat from Hameln. To cover their retreat, they burned 35 houses. The last French forces that were still able to fight stood on the right flank of the battlefield. The Corps Brigoli had 14,000 men and 44 cannons, and they were tasked to overrun the right flank of the Allies. However, ill misjudgment did cost them their advantage. Right now I'm standing at the Torenfeld, the highest point of the battlefield. The local aristocrat Graf Schaumburg von Lippe had occupied the hill with 700 men and 10 guns before any French troops could arrive. But in order to attack the right flank, the Corps Brigoli had to take the Torenfeld. Brigoli had more than enough men to take the throne. However, he thought that he faced a much bigger army, so he decided to hold his position. At 8 a.m. on the 1st of August 1759, the Marquis de Contades ordered Brigoli to cover the French retreat. The battle was won. If you would ask me for the reason of the Anglo-Prussian victory at Minden, I would say 2 things. The first one was the initiative of Graf Schaumburg von Lippe. By taking the Thronfeld, he prevented the Corps Brigoli from rolling over the right flank of the Allies. The second one was adaptation. Spurgeon disrupted both the plan of the French and the Allied armies. However, the Allies were far better in adapting to the new situation, leading to their victory. So why was the victory at Minden so important? Only 8 days after the Battle of Minden, Frederick the Great would suffer his biggest defeat at Kunersdorf, where he would lose around 20,000 men, nearly the half of his army. To the luck of Prussia, Austria and Russia did not finish it in 1759. And the French army stopped at Minden was also not able to do so, allowing Prussia to stay in the war, and ultimately leading to a Prussian-English victory in 1763. While Prussia became a dominant regional power, Britain gained important territories, mostly in India and America, catapulting it to the status of a world power.